Hello, and welcome to More Intelligent Tomorrow, a wide-ranging exploration of the potential impact of AI on the world around us, as envisioned by the future heroes of the human and machine intelligence revolution. Will robots take over the world? We'll discuss this and more with 12-year-old genius Mike Wimmer on today's episode. And now, your host, Ben Taylor.
Hey Mike Wimmer, thanks for being on the show.
Hey, thanks, Ben. Thanks for inviting me here.
Some of the things the listeners might be thinking about is to hear about a kid your age doing deep learning. They're going to try to poke holes in your foundation. What was the first language that you learned, and where did you go from there?
So yeah, the first language that I learned was Python. That was kind of my start language, and honestly, throughout, I've learned C++, Java, built my own website with HTML, and now I'm learning web app development with React and MERN. And Python is still my favorite, honestly, and not because of how basic it is. It's mainly because of how much you can do with it. And I've started from there, and I kind of built up from the original beginner stuff, and now I'm building a natural language translator for the U.S. military now, using different models. Of course, I can't tell you specifics about that one, but I've grown from that, and what I like about AI is you can apply it to anything and everything, and that endlessness is also what drives me to that as well.
How did you get over the hurdle of learning deep learning? What was your entry-level introduction into deep learning?
That really learning in deep learning, I taught myself. That's how I learned Python, and that's how I've taught myself that's how I've learned everything I know, really. And so learning deep learning and teaching myself really wasn't anything different than I had done before. And so, looking at the documentation, trial and error, online videos, pretty much a culmination of everything. And what people will tell you about me is I can take a little tidbit from this video or a tidbit from trial and error, and I can bring them together into something new.
Your traditional high school or junior high education did not prepare you for this very well.
No.
So you've had to fill a gap. And so talk about that. Talk about what was helpful in school, and then talk about where school missed the mark for you.
One of I guess you could say the positives of school was the idea of the social interaction. And, that was something that you wouldn't get from just working by yourself at home is, talking with your friends. Although I couldn't talk about, what's the ROI of my current company or how my new autonomous car project is going. I was more talking about, say, the cars and racing and Legos and the more kid stuff. And the downside of school was, there was not a lot of STEM that was available to me. Kids like me who are academically higher than their calendar age is, knowledge is not the same as the ability to learn. I was eager to learn. At my age, I'll say, hey, I asked my teacher during recess if she could sit down and teach me something new. And then they handed me this 4th grade math test with a clipboard and then said, well, he didn't ace this, so he doesn't need anything else. And that difference is something that I think is definitely need to change, along with age restrictions. Everybody thinks grade equals age, and that's honestly not the case. It's intellectual equals age, or intellectual equals grade. So that's something that I also think needs to change.
That's interesting, because a lot of people think that your intelligence is directly tied to your grades, but we see lots of examples of people that are bored and very, very intelligent, but they don't get very good grades because they're elsewhere, they're not motivated, the material's boring.
It's an interesting thing, relating the grades to intellectual ability and even grade levels like 1st grade and 2nd grade versus the age. And
we already talked about this before the show, but we had George on, so he was the Thiel recipient when he was 17. So he went straight to term sheets, started his drone company, Thiel. Would that be your first choice if you knew that was obtainable?
I'm weighing my options. Okay, do I go to school and get a business degree, for example? Or do I, do the Thiel Fellowship and learn by experience or something like that?
Do you notice that with some of the technical projects you work on where you just see things differently than maybe your adult counterparts?
Something I always say about myself is I've never been formally trained in anything. I've never taken a formal class. I've always taught myself. I've never been funneled into that way. This is how you do this. This is how it should be done. And if you do not do it that way, that's wrong. And not being funneled that way actually brings a different perspective. And, people say, well, think out of the box. Well, I always think out of the box. I've never been in the box in the first place. And that's something that I kind of pride myself on. And that's why the military, the USS OCOM, liked me so much, because I don't think in that box way.
And that allows you to step outside the standard rules, right? You can
Exactly. Yeah. And that's something that I'm gonna try myself to do, is never lose my imagination and keep trying to be creative. That's something I'm definitely gonna try to do.
What are you the most passionate about right now? So when you think about AI and technology, what would wake you up early on a weekend or send you home from like a friend activity to go work on it?
What's really kind of waking me up in the morning, as you said, is the idea of trying to get robots out into the masses and get the public to get robots. And we know that it'll be coming as soon. And getting robots not to be bad is going to be something that is going to be hard, but it'll have to come. And they're trying to get that social aspect out of there before we even think about getting the technology aspect there is going to be extremely difficult, but it'll be worth the wait.
What will robots be doing 30 years from now? What will they be capable of?
I think a lot of people think now with science fiction that there'll be one robot that can do everything we need, push a vacuum cleaner, do the dishes, wash the clothes, and everything. And what I think of is more like an avatar bot, where I have one robot or platform system thing that can control all of the other single task robots, almost like Jarvis from Iron Man. And that kind of idea of one main robot and then multiple robots, I think will be the way to go, rather than trying to develop one humanoid that can do every single thing that we need, because that's probably gonna be a whole lot harder. So if you want it quicker, they're probably just gonna need to make a bunch of single task robots.
What are your thoughts around robot personification? So the robots you have behind you, you've given them names. As they begin to act more like people, is that concerning? Is it useful?
I go back and I think about the uncanny valley, which I've written in many papers in school about, which is, the idea that we have those robots, and even I've been surrounded by robots my whole life, and even those I think is a little creepy sometimes. So I think the best way for us to avoid that situation would be to make robots look like a robot, almost like make a separate race, if you will, of robots instead. Because, like Infinite here, you can tell he is not a human, obviously, or Misty. Yeah. So I think if we remain out of that area, then we'll be fine. So, and I think, people try to make robots that look a whole lot like humans, and I don't think that's the best approach to things.
So maybe the scale is from 0 to 10. 0 would be tool or machine, does a purpose, right. It's mindless. And then a 10 would be a friend, and that becomes concerning, because how does a friend impact our environment, our mental health? What happens if your friend's firmware gets corrupted? Are you going to go through loss? Are you going to be upset about that?
Exactly.
Okay. So that's really interesting. So you're saying robots aren't really a concern as long as they kind of fall on the machine and tool built with a purpose spectrum.
About with a 5 or 4-ish.
Yeah, 5 or 4. Yeah. So 5 or 4, that's enough for you to buy it. You want to buy it and renew the lease, but it's not a 9 or 10 where it's mentally it's doing some very weird things because you're talking to the robot more than your friends. Or you're talking to the robot.
And it becomes part of you almost, yeah.
So is R2-D2 conscious? Is he a true living being? Or is he a machine?
I'm thinking, R2-D2, though he may have his personality does not equal intelligence, right? So personality could be the emotions and abilities, but I think he's still a 4 and a 5, honestly, because he has a purpose in what he does. He repairs the ships, right?
Yeah.
And that purpose that I think he's still a 4 and a 5, though he has this great personality that he's known for. I think he still is a 4 and a 5, and that's how we can unlock this ability for consumer robotics.
Yeah, and he's definitely not a 0 because he screams when he gets shot at, and we have empathy for that, so that brings him up into the middle. So, what other technologies are you excited about besides robots?
So my new startup, Reflect Social, is all surrounded around the IoT market. That's going to be something that I think is going to change. And it, like I said before, these single task robots could be a Internet of Things of robots. Honestly, a lot of people down IoT devices due to their security. So improving security in them, and then also trying to develop new ways while remaining in that 5 to 4 range, like we said before. I think it's going to be an interesting idea, interesting approach that we're going to need, but I think it's going to get there.
And do you use IoT devices in your life today?
Yes, I do. So I got Alexa's here. I have many different IoT lighting. These lights behind my TV are IoT lights, IoT door locks. I've done a bunch of different things with them. Philips Hue, Lifix, Amazon. And Reflect Social is going to do what I can tell you right now is we're going to, first off, make them all standardized where, Philips Hue is not going to talk with Google or something like that. So we're going to try to connect them all together, first off. Second of all, we're going to be an amazing integration software where we can integrate them together while also being very fun and adding a social factor to it. And that's going to be an interesting approach. Hopefully by the end of the year we'll be beta testing and launched.
And what do you mean by the social factor? Something that maybe explain that a little bit more, as much as you feel comfortable explaining.
We want to be the idea of TikTok for IoT. So that's about all I can say at this point. But we're trying to bring the younger generation into IoT. That's really what our main focus is.
Okay. Let's hit on some of the projects. You were mentioning you did something with, was it a Ring camera with some facial recognition? Maybe just pick what are three to five of your favorite projects that stand out to you.
So yeah, I can start with that one. Of course, that was actually the start of, that's kind of how Reflect Social got started, where my mom actually had spinal surgery in May of last year, and she could not get out of the couch or bed easily to see who was at the door. So what I developed was a Ring doorbell system where I could look at the camera, and developing using facial recognition system I developed. I put in the 5 most common family members and people in our family, and it would automatically unlock a IoT door lock if it was detected as a good person, but ensure it was locked if a delivery person came up. Not that they were bad, but just to ensure that the door was locked.
Any other projects you've done that have stood out to you or you've had fun with?
A few years back, I did an autonomous RC Corvette. I'm a big Corvette and Pratt Miller engineering fan who runs Corvette Racing. So, that was one of my first hardware projects itself. I was getting into the Raspberry Pi and Jetson area. I learned a lot through that, not only the hardware side, but also different principles of the software side. So it's definitely, that one was definitely quite a fun one.
That's awesome. Who inspires you the most in the tech industry?
So I'd say, I guess, outside of the tech industry would be my parents, of course. But inside the tech industry would be Elon Musk, probably, because he has the most out-of-the-box ideas. Who would ever thought that you would land a rocket on a barge in the middle of the ocean? No one ever thought of that. So those out-of-the-box ideas, those different ways of thinking that never been in the box ways that I like to think as well, is what drives me toward him. And, I kind of model how I'm working with my startups now. I'm building my PayPal now, if you will, to then make later my Tesla or SpaceX.
One of the issues with building a company, you can have a really smart tech founder that understands technology, but you really need sales and marketing, product market fit. You need the whole package. And so what do you think about when you think of sales and marketing for your own startup?
one of my favorite things to do is learn something by doing something. So, though I am the tech guy and I may be the one who can develop it that second, I'm also learning to figure out, okay, this is the pitch deck. I'm the CEO, not the CTO. So I have to figure out the business side. And that's something that I'm learning right now along the way. And it's going to be very interesting because I'm developing KPIs and making a pitch deck and every business models and everything. So I think once I learn it now, it's going to be something I can use forever.
Do you notice that there's an initial stereotype or bias that you have to get over where they perceive your age, and there's some awkwardness at the beginning? Walk us through those interactions and how you deal with that.
So yes, I've gone to numerous USSOCOM events. This is a pretty good example here. And, a lot of times I'm the only kid there, only minor ever to work for USSOCOM. And, I walked in, it's a big think tank event where they give you a problem, and then at the problem, the limitation, they said, figure out a solution. Don't build it, just figure out a solution. So, we all work in groups, and it's like, who's the kid? Is it bring your kid to work day to day, or what's going on, right? So, and then there's like, no, the kid's working. We're like, okay. So then after about the first day or so, they're like, okay, so the kid does know his stuff, right? And, I understand that people have stereotypes of it's a kid. He doesn't know much about this stuff. So, and that's something that I know, and that's why my parents instilled in me the idea of show what you know. And I have to show what I know in order to gain others' respect. So that's something that I've done over the years and something that I will continue to do.
And really the argument can be made you have to do it forever because technology is such a fast treadmill.
So, we were talking about colleges before, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I'm kind of playing around with as well is they have to stop and make the book somewhere, right? They have to stop here and make the book while we're still moving. So that's something that I'm kind of playing into it as well is, okay, well, if this book has been made last year and now we're doing this totally different, that's why I'm thinking about more pursuing a business degree rather than a technology degree if I go to college.
Do you think that you will be alive to witness the singularity or the consciousness or the superintelligence? Is that something that you think is possible in your lifetime?
I think it's possible, but I don't think it can be scaled or into a consumer by that time. Though consciousness is going to be something that's going to be very useful, I don't think consumer markets are going to be too happy about it. Like I said before, it's that 5 to 4 scale is going to be that sweet spot because consciousness, you could say, is a 10.
Yeah.
So that's going to be an interesting way to see how it plays out with the consumer area of that. But just general in the lab, probably the most, I guess you could say, proof of concept thing, probably so.
And if it can exist, do you think it's something we should not do? Do you think do you think we should put the brakes on some of the AI research to avoid this potential nightmare or misstep?
I don't think so. I think in some cases it can be used, in other cases not. So, one thing people a lot of say is, well, technology and robots, they're going to take over my job. I'm not going to have a job anymore. And something that I've always thought about is robots are going to be designed to augment jobs rather than take them over. So the idea that consciousness could probably help with that, it would probably, that logical common sense thinking could help us. But, there needs to be, a few boundaries for consumer-wise. Not the abilities, though, but consumer-wise to be wanted. Because, like I said before, the sci-fi is basically ruining the abilities of people to say, oh, there's going to be a conscious robot that's going to take over the world. Well, if we ensure that the robot doesn't give them that feeling, then we're perfectly fine with it.
And who do you think should make these decisions, or who do you think should decide what is okay, what isn't okay when it comes to robotics?
So, of course, I don't think the developer will be the best idea because there's always a business opportunity, right? I think there also almost needs to be a robotics council or something like that, robotics group that says, okay, approve or disapprove something to be allowed in a consumer, almost like the FDA for robotics.
Do you have any concerns about autonomous war and some of the robotics that already exist and will grow on the military side?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to the idea of augmenting jobs rather than replacing them, because although Boston Dynamics over there, they're developing their robots and they're giving them a gun, but the idea of autonomous war, I think it's going to be more like the Boston Dynamics Spot mini robot, more like, carrying a drone or something, which I've seen a lot of actually. Using them to augment the job of an operator, say special operations operator. It's going to be, I think that's the more route we're going to take, although it could be fully robotic thanks to the idea of not risking a human life, more risking some nuts and bolts. Right now, since we're starting to get into it, I would say no for the next year or two, but give it about 5 to 10 years, you'll probably see it if we ever go to war again.
So, Mike, I've really enjoyed talking to you. You give me a lot of different things to think about. I really love the FDA approval for robots. That feels like a good way to maybe stop us from making a 10 consciousness and focus more on delightful, usable, helpful. I really appreciate you making time to be on the podcast today.
Thank you for the opportunity as well. I've really had an amazing time, and thank you for allowing me to be on here.